Gretchen, welcome to the Dialogues.
Hi, Pete. Thanks for having me on here.
It's an absolute pleasure. I'm really excited to have you on. I think you've got one of the more interesting, fascinating, long, detailed stories of anyone we've had on so far. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and tell us a little bit about your story?
Okay, well, a significant part of my story is that a few months ago marked the 50-year mark for me. I've been on insulin for 50 years. And in the mail, I received a certificate from Diabetes New Zealand congratulating me on living 50 years on insulin. I'm not quite sure how you celebrate a thing like that. But talking to you is a way for me to celebrate and acknowledge that, yeah, I've come through 50 years on insulin, seen a lot of changes, and I'm feeling pretty fortunate and lucky. I've encountered a couple of complications along the way, but I've also had a lot of adventures and living a pretty good life that I'm grateful for.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpick there. In a second, I want to go back to like 50 years ago and talk a bit about the start, but I'm interested in actually, so you got a certificate from Diabetes New Zealand?
Yes. Yeah.
So how do they even know to send you out a certificate? Is there a register of people?
They do put out a call for people who've lived for a long time on insulin. And so they got notified that I was approaching 50 years, and my diabetes team wrote a letter acknowledging 50 years for me.
Um, that's fantastic. That's really cool, actually. It's really cool that there's actually a process in place to acknowledge that. So that's great. That's it's really nice to hear. And it's really nice to connect with you as well. So tell us, 50 years ago, you don't sound like a Kiwi. Where were you 50 years ago when you got diagnosed, and how old were you, if you don't mind saying?
Yeah, you can tell my accent that I'm not a native New Zealander, but I was born in the US, born in Pennsylvania, grew up in the Detroit area, in the suburbs of Detroit, was diagnosed type 1 diabetic when I was 8 or 9 years old. It was a different time then. I was hospitalized for 10 days and introduced to 1 injection a day and urine tests for sugar. That was all the tools we had to work with. I spent a lot of my childhood being thirsty, feeling unwell, and just winging it. I think about, we had so few tools to work with to manage the diabetes, and parents had such little information to work with. I think about what it must be like for parents today of young children with diabetes, and oh my goodness, it's wonderful that we have so much information to work with, but that would also be really difficult. Put a lot of pressure on to try to maintain really good blood sugar levels, I think. But when I was a kid, we just tried to wing it. 1 injection a day, test your urine a couple times a day, and hope for the best.
Wow, that's quite incredible. So do you even have any sense of like what your HbA1cs would have been back then in the early period?
I don't know. I don't goodness, I don't know when HbA1c was introduced. Do you?
I don't actually.
I don't.
It's an interesting question. So, I mean, you look really healthy. So do you think that that's luck, or what do you think it is that allows someone with 50 years of type 1 diabetes who started way back before the treatments that we have? What do you think it is that sort of allows some people to be healthier than others? Is it the management you've had? Is it luck? What do you think?
I think it's luck. I know people who've worked a lot harder than I have at maintaining much better blood sugar levels, and they've experienced more complications. I don't know. So I think some people are protected from complications and others are not, no matter how hard you work at it. So I don't think we can ever blame ourselves for for complications we might experience. We're landed with this lousy disease. And
Yeah.
I think some of us are lucky and some of us aren't. I do work really hard. I get mediocre results. Having said that, I had a warrant of fitness at my annual diabetic specialist session yesterday.
Yeah.
So with the help of medicine, I'm doing okay with blood pressure, blood sugar, cholesterol, thyroid, all that.
What are the areas that you're most focused on at the moment from a diabetes management and health and morbidity and so forth? What are the areas that you kind of want to stay on top of mostly at the moment?
Oh, personally, I'm trying really hard to get my hemoglobin A1C down to the point. I need to reduce it by one more point in order to keep my funding, to keep my pump and my supplies. So I think it's an odd part of our New Zealand system where some of us have to reduce our hemoglobin A1C by a certain amount in order to maintain our insulin pump funding.
That's fascinating. Do you know if that exists anywhere else, that concept?
Don't think so. I know in the States, if you've got private health insurance, nobody's asking you to prove that you're making the best use of the technology.
No, but actually it's an interesting concept, isn't it? I mean, I think because one of the arguments that I have for governments investing in new technology, right? So, I would advocate that governments should enable CGMs for all type 1 diabetics, right? Because the upfront investment, and it would be a significant investment, right? There would be a lot of people who would require it, and they're not that cheap. But my argument would be, and I think there's some pretty good economics around this, some modeling around this to show that if you invest upfront in CGMs, that the long-term benefits to the patients themselves, obviously, but the system in general, from reducing burden on the system from people with morbidity and mortality later in life, it makes it a good return on investment. It would seem to make it a good return on investment. And I think that we have like the Nordic countries that have, I can't remember which one it is, maybe Sweden, that has something like 80% of its population on CGMs, because I guess they get that long-term perspective. And now I think that what you're talking about is New Zealand's going, well, we're happy to pay for this, but we're only happy to pay for it for a while, and we want to see improvement, which I think's not a bad thing. Makes kind of sense.
It is a challenge, though, if you think about if a diabetic is struggling to maintain the perfect or the best blood sugars they can, according to that one test.
Yeah.
They can take away the tool that helps you manage it the best you can. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting, actually. I mean, I suppose if it's out of your control to some extent, and you lose it due to no lack of trying, I mean, I suppose it's going to get worse potentially, isn't it? If they take it away, your management's going to get worse, and actually it probably will work against that concept that I described.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah.
How do they justify that approach?
It's a funding model.
Yeah. It's to save them money?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Well, it could be worse. You could be in the US.
However, having been in the US, if you are on the right side of the track, you get gold standard treatment, gold standard technology funded through your insurance. If you're on the wrong side of the track, it's a disaster. So there's a huge polarity in how diabetics can access technology and resources to manage their diabetes. And you will know insulin is even hard for people to get in the US, even if they have a private health insurance that they're paying a lot of money for.
Yeah, it's kind of one of my great bugbears. Would you say that I think my take would be that in the US, there's probably just more people on the wrong side of the track.
Mm-hmm.
So I think you're right. I think that my understanding is that if you get good cover, good healthcare, good insurance, good access, then you're going to be treated well, but actually it's just a bit harder for most people to get that. The bar for that is a bit higher than in other countries.
And it's like you either have employment that comes along with good insurance or you don't. And
Yeah. So do you remember back to what it was like as an 8-year-old? What are your memories early on of having diabetes, of getting diagnosed?
I don't remember being terribly traumatized or anything. And frankly, I don't recall it changing my life dramatically. We sort of pretended we were watching my diet, got 1 injection a day for a long time, tested my urine, but life just sort of went on. Hardly disrupted. I don't remember. Teachers weren't very aware of what was going on. There was no accommodation for taking an exam where I might test my blood sugars halfway through an exam. None of that was available, which I understand would be very useful, and I understand it's necessary for people now who are, using pumps where you only have short-acting insulin on board, and we need to be on top of what our blood sugars are from hour to hour. But I do remember what gave me the most motivation to work on controlling my diabetes, and that only meant controlling my diet to the best of my ability, was going to summer camp. Camp for diabetic kids I lived for that, and it was a wonderful part of my summers to go hang out with other kids and camp counselors, and where we learned a little bit more about diabetes, but it became normalized, and it was a huge motivator for me to work harder. And so I'm a real strong advocate of peer support groups and camps and meeting other people. And now we have Facebook and online support, which is, I rely on it a lot, and I'm a big advocate of online support groups. And
That's good. And I agree. I think that having access to a peer group and feeling normal in that group is important, and probably particularly back then, I suppose, when there wasn't as much technology and you didn't have the avenues that you have now to find people in similar situations. So the summer camps, they must have been really cool. So, I mean, I think in Australia and probably New Zealanders as well, the summer camp thing isn't really something that is part of our culture. But, I think we've all seen those movies about summer camp and all the shenanigans that kids get up to on different summer camps. And there's some great comedies set in those settings. So this was a summer camp specifically for type 1 diabetics.
yes, in Michigan, Camp Medica, Michigan Diabetes Children's Association ran a summer camp. I think I went for about 7 summers. You go for
Wow.
we went for 2 weeks at a time, but it was a highlight of my year. Really looked forward to it. Those friends became really important friends, and that was the only peer support I ever had as a diabetic as a kid.
Yeah, that's so cool. Okay, so I guess moving from that period, so you're 8 and then you did 7 years of summer camps. Tell us a little bit about your diabetes. We'll jump on. I want to definitely talk about your career stuff because I think that's obviously important and relevant. But I want to kind of just follow the path a little bit more along your 50-year journey. Move on to sort of when you were leaving high school, for example. Where were you, and kind of was management improving at that point?
Management was not improving. As a matter of fact, at the age of 19, my first year at university, I had a sudden and dramatic loss of my vision. I was sitting around a campfire on a camping trip. Smoke blew into my face, and I had a coughing fit from the smoke and had retinal bleeds in both eyes. So what that meant was the diabetic retinopathy had taken hold and we weren't aware of it. So there were weak-walled blood vessels in the back of my retina, and they both leaked dramatically sitting around that campfire. So within about 2 hours, I had a really dramatic loss of vision. And so I was at university. So I took a term off, a 10-week term off university. I was a journalism student at university. Took a 10-week term off to go to a blind rehab center in Michigan, learn how to use a white cane and learn Braille, and learned a little bit more about managing my diabetes as a blind person. And then returned to university and my jobs as a blind person. And so finished my undergraduate degree and went 9 years as somebody who couldn't access print for most of that time and used a white cane for much of that time.
So how old were you then? For those 9 years?
9 years, yeah.
Yeah, how old? What age was that?
Well, I was from 19 to 20, 29.
Wow, that's incredible. So you were pretty much fully blind in that period?
Well, I'm not able to read print. Vision fluctuated, if you know about diabetic retinopathy. My vision did fluctuate a lot during those years, but I was not able to read print for most of that and used a white cane. Had a series of eye surgeries, a lot of laser treatment for the retinopathy. I had a vitrectomy, a retinal reattachment, cataracts, and secondary cataracts. So about 23 eye surgeries. But the same year that I lost my vision, I got my first glucose meter. And so that was a dramatic change in my life. All of a sudden, I could manage my diabetes, could change the insulin, regulate my diet, because before that, with urine testing alone was no way to manage blood sugars. But lost my vision the same year I got my first glucose meter, and that changed everything.
And so when you say, well, actually two things, it must have been devastating to be blind.
Well, I'm sure it was, but my experience of it was I just kept plowing ahead. I returned to university. I hitchhiked. I had some big adventures. I kept my jobs. I was a summer camp counselor. I worked at that job. I kept my jobs at university where I was an assistant to people with disabilities. Maintained doing those jobs, kept up my studies with my books tape recorded, with people reading me the exams out loud with some reader-writer assistance. So that's how I finished my journalism degree as a blind student. And I just kept going. I was 19. I don't think I saw the big picture. I wasn't devastated about my future life as a blind person. Yeah. Somehow I just kept going. And even though those were some really difficult times, some of the most fun times of my life was university. I loved university, and I took 10 weeks out and then returned and was with my friends and back to my jobs and to my studies, and kept going.
Wow, I mean, that's really incredible. I think it definitely speaks to your resilience and your perspective. Where do you think what do you attribute that to?
Oh, it probably was just denial, Pete. It was just a strong sense of denial.
Yeah, I understand that. I think as diabetics, we all probably have a little bit of that. Like we have this thing that we didn't ask for, that we have to manage every day, and we just kind of get on with life. And you could call it denial, but I think you can also probably see it as strength as well, as acceptance and moving on. Because I think that there's probably certainly diabetics out there who don't always have that. And I think it's really great to hear these stories. And I think it's fantastic to hear about this experience that you had where the blindness on top of the diabetes. and you just got on with it and kept going. I think it's a great story for anyone to hear, to think about when they're going through their day-to-day, because 9 years is not a short period of time. And, you know, so well done for your perspective on that. So how did you become not blind anymore?
Well, like I said, I finished my undergraduate journalism degree as a blind student, and then I joined a volunteer corps for 2 years. It's sort of based on the Peace Corps, but it's domestic within the United States. It was the Jesuit Volunteer Corps, and I did 2 years there. I worked in prisons and food banks, and had some wonderful experiences in that volunteer corps. And then I went on to get a master's degree in blind rehabilitation. So I had learned about the rehabilitation process personally, was fascinated by it, went and got a master's degree in blind rehab. So, learned about teaching people adaptive daily living skills and Braille, the skills that I had to learn to get through. So I was still a blind student doing my master's degree. And then I got a job in blind rehabilitation and worked for the Vermont Association for the Blind and Vision Impaired as a peer counselor and a vision rehabilitation teacher. And shortly into that professional position, I had some final eye surgeries, which gave me a dramatic return of vision. I had cataracts removed, and unbeknownst to all of us, my retinas had improved over the years, probably due to the good blood sugar control that the glucose meters had given me. So the glucose meters really changed my life. So from the time I was able to use those and manage my sugars better, the retinas started to improve, and all the surgeries. But the retinas improved, the cataracts came off, and I read down the eye chart, got a driver's license, and continued my work as a blind rehabilitation specialist, but with some dramatically improved vision.
And how's your vision now?
My vision has been stable since then. I'm fortunate. I can read, I can drive. Still do consider myself vision impaired. I have some significant losses, but I can function. I can do almost anything. I do have significant nighttime difficulties with my vision, but I'm just very fortunate. My vision has stayed stable all of these years.
Do you remember like that moment when, was it a gradual thing? Like when the vision came back, it wasn't like there was one day where it was not there, another day where it was there. It was sort of a gradual over time experience.
Well, I had a sort of a gradual improvement, but a sudden improvement when the cataracts were removed. The day after cataract surgery, when they removed the bandages, I could see and read down the eye chart like I hadn't been able to do for 9 years.
Do you remember the feeling?
I remember being the return of my vision was more stressful than losing my vision, because I didn't know whether I could rely on that vision any longer. I had learned how to do things non-visually, and all of a sudden I had vision that I wasn't sure I could rely on, and that became challenging. But over time, I learned to trust that vision and to use it again, and to drive safely.
So it was
which scares people.
It was a trust experience, and by that I mean you had this vision and you weren't sure when it was going to go again.
Yes.
Wow, that's amazing. What an amazing experience. What was it like seeing your friends and family again, or being able to see them properly? That must have been amazing. I mean, you must have had friends that you maybe had never seen.
Yes. Sometimes people look a little bit better than when you put on clear glasses. I didn't know I had freckles and things, and And I remember being very startled at seeing, you know how you can see dust particles in a sunbeam? Really threw me off because I hadn't seen that as an adult. Um, you know, but I eventually have learned to trust that vision and rely on it, and it's remained stable, and I'm incredibly grateful for that.
Do you remember any of the reactions from your friends and family?
Um, I had to think about that. Um, that was a time in my life when I was moving around rapidly. Um, and within a year of the return of my vision, I immigrated to New Zealand. So what has frightened families when they've come to visit me in New Zealand and I drive them around on the left side of the road.
Yeah, yeah. That's fascinating. So, and tell us about the move to New Zealand.
The move to New Zealand was, I was seeking an adventure. I was working as a professional in the field of blindness, and the Royal New Zealand Foundation of the Blind was advertising for people with professional certifications for 18-month job contracts. And I took the opportunity, came out, and this was before the internet, so I knew very little about New Zealand. I had seen pictures in the encyclopedia of what I thought were palm trees, and so I thought I was coming to a warm country.
Yeah.
Now, needless to say, I've never been so cold as I was when I came to New Zealand in a winter time,
Yeah.
and bone-chilling cold without the central heating that I was used to in the United States. Uh, but I came out here for an adventure. I didn't intend to stay. I came for an 18-month job contract. But I loved New Zealand. I landed in Wellington. I loved Wellington. I loved my work at the Blind Foundation. And that contract came to an end, and I found an opportunity working in another field of disability, in vocational rehabilitation, for a job placement agency for people with disabilities called WorkBridge here in New Zealand. And that was a wonderful opportunity. That gave me a permanent position and permanent residency here in New Zealand. And a few years later, I got an opportunity to come work at Massey University, where I am a lecturer in rehabilitation studies. So I'm able to pursue my passions, research and teach in disability and rehabilitation, and and maintain my passions and live in this amazing country, which is so beautiful. It's turned out to be a great opportunity for me.
Yeah, pretty fortuitous given the world that we're in. I think New Zealand gets a lot of accolades for many reasons now. It's being run quite well, handled COVID quite well. I mean, I suppose New Zealand is better off for having you there because it sounds like you've given a lot back to communities and people in need in general.
Well, thanks, Pete. That means a lot. But my passion is to improve the lives of people with disabilities, and I hope I get to do that in my current job by educating and informing the students who will become the professionals providing services and developing policy and educating everybody else. So I'm about promoting disability awareness, inclusion, and equity for all of us, people living with long-term health conditions, people living with blindness. And I am now the very proud mother of 2 children who live with complex disabilities, including Down syndrome. And so I become a very strong advocate for children with disabilities as well.
And so I guess having children with disabilities is going to spur on that interest in advocating and improving the lives of people with disabilities. But that's now, what was it was it the blindness, or did this part of you that wanted to contribute in this way to the world around you, where did that come from, this desire to support and give back?
Oh, well, you know, a lot of it is self-interest too. I mean, I'm researching and teaching about disability, and I identify as disabled as I first of all, I view myself as living with diabetes and a chronic health condition. Is I view that as a disability. Not
Yeah,
everybody does. Some
yeah,
people classify that differently. Um, and for me, that's my primary personal disability. The vision impairment came on top of that, but that was a result of the diabetes. Um, but I became a vision rehab teacher. I took a couple of years to explore if that was really going to suit my personality and my skills before I pursued it. I didn't want to just do it because I was disabled and blind myself. So I did do some research and look into other careers, and I shadowed other vision rehab teachers to see if that's what I wanted to do. Um, I decided it really did suit my personality and my skills and my interests. I had thought about going into social work, but I enjoy rehabilitation so much, working side by side with people, working on practical problem solving. And I love that part of rehab. It's just finding alternative ways of doing things and solving problems creatively alongside people. So yeah, I get to pursue my passion in that area, and I've been able to do it for a long time now.
Can you give us, the listeners, a bit of an example of what this work looks like from a practical perspective? So, but is there any examples you can think of someone who's come in to receive assistance, um, and the change that that assistance has enabled?
Uh, well, when I was a service provider,
Yeah,
most of my clients were older, and most of them were older women, and most of them had recently lost vision. Most of them had gradually and recently lost vision, but I had the joy of working with them to trying to get them back to the activities they loved doing. And you know, the definition of rehabilitation is returning to your previous life roles. So what I loved is helping these people get back to what they loved doing, getting involved in maybe going back to the senior center and playing cards with their friends after I had taught them how to use Braille playing cards or large print playing cards or the right magnification, and working with their environments, teaching their card playing mates that they weren't cheating, and showing people a little bit of visual, showing people what it might be like to have cataracts or glaucoma or retinitis pigmentosa or diabetic retinopathy. So just changing environments as well as teaching people skills to get back to doing what they love doing. Some of the fun stuff I got to do as a blind rehab teacher is helping a woman figure out how to gather her goose eggs without being attacked by her goose. And she had to carry her white cane in one hand and a bat in the other to keep the goose away. Helping a man figure out how to safely shovel the snow off his roof in Vermont as a newly blind person. Rigging up magnification devices to help somebody pan for gold. Shoe horses. That's some of the stuff that I got to do as a blind rehab teacher. And this is what I teach my students to do here at Massey too.
and that's quite interesting, because like those examples, like I think to myself, well, if I was sitting there with that individual, you know, I could come up with ways of sort of trying to help them myself. When you're teaching students, what are the principles that you're teaching that enable them in those situations to come up with solutions and support individuals better than, say, me, for example, as a layperson trying to support them?
Yeah. Well, we're just trying to teach client-centered goal setting is a really important part of what I teach. Is It has to be the person's idea of what their dreams and what their goals are. Don't dismiss them. Don't have preconceived notions about what a disabled person can or can't do, because you don't know what that individual has within them. So it's goal setting and dream building and creative problem solving. Just never say no.
That's really interesting. And I think that healthcare overall and in general can probably learn from those basic principles, because if we look at healthcare historically anyway, healthcare has kind of been a bit about what a doctor thinks is the outcome, the best outcome for you. But I think that the system now is starting to kind of flip around to a value-based system, a patient-centered system where, patient-reported outcomes and what a patient wants as their outcome is becoming more important. So it's actually interesting that you're already teaching that in your part of healthcare. I think that probably, other specialties can probably learn some things from you and from the area that you're in general.
Yeah, I do wish we could teach to every student about, disability awareness, the importance of inclusion, and about, never saying no, creative problem solving, and disabled people can do anything.
Yeah, really interesting. So you're lecturing at the moment?
Yeah, lecturing in health sciences, rehabilitation studies, disability, public health.
Okay. That's really, really cool. So, well, let's go back maybe just to kind of finish off and talk a little bit about diabetes management and, where you're at the moment. I think where we left off your diabetes story, you had gained vision again. Do you want to kind of go back to there and just kind of take us through I don't know how many years it was from then to now, but like the experiences that you've had and how your management has improved, in the last whatever period that's been.
Yep. Well, it's been about 30 years since my vision improved.
Yeah.
And since I got my first, I'd received my first glucose meter about 40 years ago. But that was life-changing. It's the technology. And since then, there's been improvements in the blood testers. And then came the insulin pump, which was a huge change in technology that allowed me better control than I've ever been able to get. It's very difficult to control diabetes, and I can work full-time at it and only get mediocre results. But the pump has given me, the pump was an amazing tool for me, and I funded that myself for 20 years. And then, of course, more recently, I've been using the Freestyle Libre, the continuous glucose monitor, more like a flash glucose monitor. But that has, again, allowed me to improve things to even a better hemoglobin A1C and to feel better, to be able to exercise without the low sugars creeping up on me. So I'm grateful for the technology, and every time there's a change in technology, I have a wonderful honeymoon period where I have really good control, and then things back up just a little bit. But the pump and the Freestyle Libre have really enhanced my life remarkably.
I was reflecting on this just yesterday about this concept of like beginner's mindset. Like it's kind of a bit of a yoga principle as well. In yoga, you never really become an expert. You always feel like you're still at day one in many senses. And I think diabetes sometimes is a bit like that, in that there's no perfection. I'm never going to achieve perfection. And because of that, because you're never ever going to be an expert, you know, you never really feel like you're ever going to solve the problem. You're just continuing to learn every single day because, you know, an example is for me, like my overnight, I'm getting highs through the night, much worse than I was. And, you know, if I eat pasta or whatever for dinner, you know, something's happened in my kind of overnight levels in that whatever insulin I had on board isn't enough anymore. So I'm having to kind of tweak that. And it never seems like that changes. It always feels like when I get like to a point where I've got any sense that I'm kind of like really doing well, something changes physiologically, you know, to how I deal with insulin, for example.
Mm.
And that means that I have to kind of almost reassess and come up with a new plan.
Constantly.
What's that?
Constantly. It's
Constant.
constant, isn't it?
Yeah, it's I mean, I think that that's where it could become frustrating for many people with diabetes, you know, in that sense of you never win. You know, as soon as you start to think you might win, something changes and you've got to figure it out. So I think that, you know, one of the things that diabetes teaches me is like not being too hard on myself.
Mhm.
You know, failure is okay. It's actually, it's essential.
Yep. I've spent a lot of years feeling guilty. And
Yeah.
you know, and I gave a talk at a local diabetes group called Bad Diabetic, sort of taken that on. It's like, yeah, I am. The doctors
The
have
group's
told
called
me I'm
Bad
a
Diabetic.
bad diabetic. What's that, Pete?
The group's called Bad Diabetic.
Well, I gave a talk called Bad Diabetic
Oh, okay, great.
because I often felt and often do feel if my numbers are not good, you know, that or a complication arises, that it's my fault. Um, I think I've come a long way in it, where I can joke about being a bad, naughty diabetic.
Yeah.
That we're all just doing the best we can at any given point. Yeah, and I get frustrated when other people police other diabetics and say they're being naughty, or, you know, I don't believe that. I think we're all doing the best we can with what we have. We might need more support, might need more education, might need better technology. I don't think we're bad diabetics.
That's a really great point. So just in finishing off, what's, you know, recently for you, what's been the latest improvement that you've made? So for example, for me, you know, it's been that overnight stuff where I've had to, one, actually kind of maybe admit that I need to adjust my diet, because my attitude's always been I can eat what I want and I can manage it with insulin. But actually at the moment it feels like that's not the case. I actually need I need to let go of that attitude, and I need to start to actually be a little bit more cognizant of how many carbs, what carbs, etc., that I'm eating, particularly before bedtime for my evening meal. And that's been, you know, I had that attitude of, well, I can eat what I want because I'm managing it well. But, you know, I have to go, well, I'm wrong. I have to now adjust my diet a little bit. And it's a bit hard for me to do that because, you know, I'm used to thinking that I'm good at this and I can eat what I want. So that's been kind of one of my realizations lately, is I have to actually adjust my diet a little bit, sadly.
Yeah, I'm like I told you, I'm working really hard on that hemoglobin A1C. But
Yeah.
when I get that better, I feel better. And I've been working on low carbs, and I've started with the morning. I've got my breakfast figured out where I can eat low carb and keep my blood sugars decent throughout the morning. And I got the overnight figured out. I always figure if you get the overnight blood sugars figured out, that's half your day. And there's a lot of factors that you don't have to, because you don't tend not to eat through the night. That's one factor can exclude. So I always, if I can get my overnight blood sugars, that's half my day of decent blood sugar. So I've got the overnight figured, and I've sort of recently sorted out the breakfast. And then I'm trying to introduce low carb to my lunch to get the rest of the afternoon sorted out. So those are the battles, and they're taking time. And it's hit or miss one day it'll work and the next it doesn't. So it's about having the patience to look back and look at patterns. And those
Sorry, go
Facebook groups are my lifeline at the moment, because people will discuss this with me. And I didn't have anybody to discuss that with before. Really helpful.
So cool. And I think that the message there is that even after 50 years, and congratulations once again on 50 years, even after 50 years, the game doesn't change, you know, like it's not like you know any more or you do any better. It's still the same process, and it's still like little minor tweaks. It's like micro informatics in a sense. So I think it's a really great way to finish off today. And Gretchen, thank you so much. Congratulations on the work that you do, the contribution that you make to the world around you. I think you're a really great example, and I think your story is fascinating, and really grateful to have you on the podcast.
Well, thank you, Pete, and thank you for what you do, for informing everybody and working on insulin availability for everybody. That's so important. So thank you for your work in that area.
No worries. It's a pleasure to chat to you, and have a nice day, and we'll connect soon.
All right, Pete. Thanks.
Take care.